Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for this day.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Llegaron los nuevos McCrispy Strips, listos para aventurarse en la mezcla de mayo ketchup, la barbecue que quedó en el fondo de la cajita, hot fudge sundae y en la nueva creamy chili McCrispy Strip dip. Los nuevos McCrispy Strips, ahora en McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to episode number 4 of The Edge with me, Eagles Eric, and our new co-host, Sam Finkel. For those who are familiar with Inside the Birds, Sam has done some awesome analytics work in their pre-draft coverage among some other content. And that's kind of when I first got exposed to him. I thought this guy is an up-and-coming star. So I kind of wanted to persuade him to join The Edge and really, I think, improve the show. It's something I saw in my past podcasts that when I was able to work with other people, it was a dramatically better product. So I'm super pumped to bring you on. So how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's an honor to be here with you and to even have you say those such nice things. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about working with you.
Yeah, I think the audience will definitely become a big fan of yours pretty quickly here. So today's topic, we got the salary cap. It's something I touched on in some previous episodes, that we would kind of demystify the salary cap, talk about Howie's cap wizardry. So is that what we're going to accomplish here today, Sam?
I certainly hope so. Yeah. We're gonna talk about the salary cap. We're gonna have some fun, and hope you guys learn something too.
And just a warning to everyone out there: yes, some of these slides are information dense. Don't worry. We'll try to make it as accessible as possible. And if there's anything we don't touch on or explain, write it in the comments, and I promise you we will answer. This is to make people who really don't have a good idea of the salary cap, or even those who have a fairly good handle, you're going to guarantee to learn something. All right, so let's get into it. Tell us about, what's the salary cap? Tell us about it, the history, the background.
Yeah, so the salary cap is essentially an artificial ceiling on how much each team can pay their players. It was created in 1994 in football after being adopted by the NBA in the 1980s. It is a lot newer than people would think, being created in 1994, and it's a hard cap, meaning that you can't really go over it. There are some very minor exceptions, but for the most part, teams must be cap compliant. There's no luxury tax or anything like that.
Gotcha. And it looks like it came into effect in 1994. Is it a coincidence that most of the Cowboys' success was before that?
It is not a coincidence. The Cowboys were one of the teams that had the highest payrolls because they were a larger market team, and it really disadvantaged the smaller market teams. And that's why you have the salary cap as a means of competitive balance to allow all market teams to compete for players at the same, starting threshold.
And so you look at like the MLB, for example, and the Dodgers have this incredible payroll and essentially buy a World Series. Is that kind of what the Cowboys were doing in the 70s and 80s?
Essentially, I mean, they were able to, outpay everybody else. And with the mechanisms in the NFL salary cap, that's just not the case.
So how is the salary cap calculated? We want to get into that.
I'm really glad you asked. So there's basically a formula that the league uses. It's about league revenue times an agreed about percentage from the players union and the league and the teams through the collective bargaining agreement, which is around 48%, subtracted by the projected cost of player benefits divided by the 32 teams. That's kind of the starting point for all teams, but the teams are going to look a little bit different otherwise.
Gotcha. So the bulk of that, it's coming from where? Where is their money coming from?
Yeah, so the largest source is the league media revenue, but there's also other sources like the NFL Ventures, postseason revenue, and local revenue. I want you to think like TV deals, tickets, jersey sales, and stuff like that. What's interesting is in 2029, the NFL, their media agreement has an opt-out clause. Everyone thinks they're going to opt out. They're probably going to because the NBA just signed a huge deal, and the NFL has a much wider reach and more viewership, and therefore it's undervalued. So everyone thinks that the league revenue or the league media deal will be significantly higher, which means that the league revenue will be significantly higher, which if you look at the formula means the salary cap should be really a lot higher. So you expect a lot of teams, especially the Eagles, are hinging on 2029, which is that year of the opt-out for a lot of their salary caps. There's a lot of pressure on that year being a lot higher so that they can pay players, extend players, and there's just a huge emphasis on that year in particular because it's supposed to expand so much.
And has it been going up lately?
It pretty much goes up every year around 8 to 10%, but there was that year of COVID where it actually went down, which is very rare, but teams need to be, cautious that it's possible if it doesn't grow as much or if it even declines, that will affect their payroll.
So let's say you want to extend a rookie and the cap's going up 10% per year. Well, if you wait an extra year, is it like you're paying a 10% premium to sign that guy?
I mean, essentially, it's the time value theory of money, right? So today's dollar is worth more than tomorrow's dollar. So you bet against, you basically are taking a loan against future capital by paying now. Paying early is always better in these kind of situations.
And as we get into it, I think we'll kind of illustrate how the Eagles are one team that's really been focusing on let's pay our guys as early as we possibly can. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say, and it's a key part of their strategy and success.
So, just on a team-by-team basis, how is all this calculation happening? I see on the slide there's a lot of different colors. Can you help me understand this?
Yeah, so that salary cap number we just talked about with the league revenue is that red number. And that's kind of the starting place for all teams. But then there are two other variables that kind of come into this, which is cap rollover, which teams have an opportunity to move some cap from the previous year to the current year, and adjustments, which happen from a bunch of different reasons, which we'll discuss later. But each team's starting point is that $279.2 million number we just had in the last slide. And then you add this potential rollover and add or subtract potential adjustments. And that's kind of where you start with this.
And a term that's always coming up is dead cap, right? The Eagles are paying Brandon Graham when he's not even on the roster. The Eagles are paying even Carson Wentz at one point when he's no longer on the team. Is that where dead cap kind of comes in? Yeah.
So based on the way that the Eagles really structure their contracts, they use a lot of void years and other terms of manipulating how the cap actually looks. And that money needs to get due at some point. And so the way that happens is that's money that you structure out. And again, a lot of times it's already paid. It's just the accounting principles that delay the payment in terms of the salary cap. And so that's just the actual dollar amount of players' cap charge that remain after the natural end of the contract or the release of a player or a trade.
So, for example, it says dead cap equals the fully guaranteed money remaining on their contract. So if the Eagles sign a deal and they say, oh, in 3 years, we're going to pay you this no matter what. Well, if that player is no longer on the roster after 3 years, that becomes dead cap. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, it's still an obligation that the team must commit to. So therefore, it's still charged to them.
And I think a key distinction here is at what time does the player receive cash? And then what time does that cash actually go onto the cap? Those are two different things. Is that correct?
That is. And it's a really important distinction that we'll talk about a little bit later. But cash and cap are very different, just concepts.
And, looking at all this text, there's a lot of terms that may not resonate with you yet. As we get into this, we will show concrete examples of contracts of players on the Eagles, and it will make it much clearer which each of these terms mean and where the money is coming from.
Absolutely.
So are you why can't you go over the cap, or is there a minimum amount that you have to exceed?
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about the maximum. It's very interesting that you said minimum because people don't think that there's a minimum spend. But again, in the CBA, the players do have a say in this and they want to be protected. So they want to get paid. So there are two real main rules about these cap minimums. So first off, each team individually must spend at minimum 89% of the cap over a 4-year CBA period. However, all teams collectively must spend 95% of the cap or more within the 4-year CBA period. If all the teams fail to meet that 95% threshold, the league must pay the remaining amount directly to the players. And that includes players that are retired. That includes players that are out of the league. If that threshold was not met in that 4-year period, everyone's getting paid by the league itself. You can prevent owners from colluding and or limiting the amount that they can actually pay their players. It's so the players get paid. It's important the players get paid. This is a mechanism to protect that.
It sounds like we need that in my fantasy football league.
It would be very fun to put in your fantasy football league.
Are there any examples of teams violating these rules?
Yeah, so a recent example with the Houston Texans in 2020, they gave Deshaun Watson membership access to a training facility, and it wasn't reported. And so since it wasn't reported, they were fined $175,000 and a 2023 fifth-round pick.
So there's a rumor that you have the entire CBA physical copy. Is that true?
It is true. It's been here for about 2 years. I haven't really been able to use it too much, but I do have the entire collective bargaining agreement printed out and on my desk.
So it looks like a pretty thick binder. Is that where some of these nuances come in?
Yeah. So most of the stuff we're going to be talking about today are in Article 13, which is the salary cap accounting rules. And yeah, it's a pretty thick document, about 500 pages or so. So
you want to walk us through some of these mechanisms?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, let's talk about cap rollover. So teams can carry over the unused cap space from each year, essentially. So you declare it before the start of the new league year. I think it's a 4 p.m. deadline or something like that, which is pretty interesting. And you really can carry over any amount as long as you're complying with that minimum threshold. So there is some limitation to it, but teams can carry over, if they didn't want to spend so much and they wanted to save it for next year, they certainly can. And they do. And so that's a cool concept and mechanism that teams can use to, increase. If they're expecting an extension in the future, they can, be a little strategic with it. And I know the Eagles are expecting some big extensions in the future, especially with how successful the 2023 and 2024 draft classes were for them.
So when you look at a future year, the amount of cap space, that might not be including what they're going to roll over in the current year. Is that fair?
That is very fair to say, for sure. That being said, there also is some other mechanisms such as cap acceleration. So when a team has, an unamortized bonus money, it hits the cap all at once due to trade release or just the natural end of a contract. So Eagles use a lot of void years. That's a big way that they structure their contracts. But when a contract does void, all that becomes doable. And that's what we talk about when we say cap accelerates, is just that when a player is no longer on the team, anything that they have that is guaranteed or, is in this void year would just accelerate.
Gotcha. So let's say we signed a free agent a 1-year contract, and it's a $10 million contract, and let's just pretend it's all signing bonus. If they include the maximum amount of void years, that would be up to 5 years, correct?
Yep. So you can prorate a signing bonus up to 5 years, that's why you would use the void years if you want to split the cap.
So in a 1-year contract for $10 million, split over 5 years, that would equal $2 million per year. So their first year salary cap hit would be $2 million, correct?
Correct.
So does that mean it's $2 million the next year?
No, it all accelerates and becomes that $8 million is doable. And that's where you have other mechanisms that we'll talk about, like extension or restructure, if you want to move that cap around a little bit. But what's interesting in that example you brought up is that player would have already been paid the cash of that $10 million immediately upon signing, if it was structured, like you said, as just a signing bonus.
Gotcha. And which contracts actually count against these thresholds that the teams can exceed?
Yeah, so in the offseason, where we are right now, it's only the top 51 contracts in terms of just value. And remember, the NFL roster is 53-man, 16-man practice squad, and one international player who's exempt from the International Pathway Program. So, yeah.
And tell me about the minimum salary benefit.
Yeah, it's just a rule that allows veterans with minimum salaries to count less against the cap if signed to these qualifying contracts.
Gotcha. So a guy I've always been banging the table for is Calais Campbell. Now, I think he did command significantly more than the veteran minimum, but let's say he came back for one more year. He's been in the league for such a long time. What he would be paid as a veteran would be more than a guy who's an undrafted free agent. Is that right?
That is correct. And a lot of it is to try to extend the careers of the players. And it's probably something that was argued by the player unions to help protect players and not be replaced. That's kind of the whole key, try to keep the NFL player's career going.
Yeah. And so when Howie brings in these 30-something-year-olds to fill out the back end of their roster in June or July, it might be not a big hit on the cap.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to frame it, for sure.
So it's something we touched on earlier, how cash and cap are not the same thing. They're phrases that are often conflated when people are talking about the salary cap. Can you help us distinguish between those?
Cash is what they receive. Cap is how it is accounted for.
Gotcha. So we know there's all these different ways to pay players with bonuses, incentives, and all that. Throw that out for a second. If they just said straight up, we're giving each guy $10 million base salary each year, would the cash and the cap be the same?
Absolutely. Yes, it would be.
Really, all it is when you throw in all these creative cap mechanisms to spread out the money over several years, it changes that calculus. Is that fair?
That is the best way to frame it. I absolutely agree with you. Here's a good way to visualize it. So I actually published an article about this last year around this time about the Eagles' cash and cap hits compared to some other teams. So we just borrowed that and updated the data from that. And it kind of shows you where these cash and cap splits are. So if you see in 2017 and 2018, they were pretty even, but the Eagles recently have made it a push to put more cash than cap, and they've been able to manipulate the cap a little bit more. And again, this chart right here is the T51. When you look at the total liabilities, it's a lot closer.
Gotcha. And in spending a lot of cash, it doesn't always pay dividends. I think the Cleveland Browns are an example of this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they spent the most cash last year.
I believe
one of the worst teams.
So yes, and here's the thing. When you pay cash, the cap is going to follow at some point. It will become due. It becomes relatively cheaper if you keep pushing it back. But you see with the Saints, it becomes due eventually.
Right. And people always talk about how they're in cap hell. There's so much turnover with NFL rosters. It's something that they talked about on the Darius Slay podcast, that these teams, they want to, like the Lions, they really want to get back at the Eagles. But there's no getting back because in 2025, it's a totally different team. So how does it all work, interface with the cap when you have players that are released, players that are traded? How does that all work?
Yeah, anytime a player's contract ends, whether that be naturally through the course of the contract or whether that be this example you just gave, which is trade or release, you need to kind of look at what happens with that. And so what you want is ideally cap savings, and what that is just the cap hit minus the dead cap amount, and hopefully, you're not actually losing that much. But the cap savings represent how much a team saves by releasing or trading a player. There's two real ways that you see releases happen, and you don't see this with trades, right? They say post June 1 designation or pre-June 1st cut. What does that mean? And here's what it means. If you do it pre-June 1, all that dead cap is due that year. When you do it post June 1st, you're able to split it between this year and next year. That is what it does. You're still paying the same amount. You're just able to spread that hit between 1 year and the next. When instead of just doing it early, then you just take the whole hit right there.
So we look at a player like Bryce Huff. Is it much more likely that if they did get rid of him, it would be after June 1st?
Absolutely. What complicates it is he has an option bonus for being on the roster in 2025, which probably would trigger post June 1st anyway. I don't think there's an exact date reported of when that roster bonus would actually hit, but I think it's safe to say it would be closer to the actual regular season or late in the preseason when it actually hits. So if there were to be movement that was not a trade and the trade is still the best outcome for the Eagles, it would be post June 1.
And with Dallas Goedert, a phrase that was uttered a lot in the media was restructure. Was that what even happened? What is a restructure?
Restructure is just adjusting a player's contract, converting their base salary to a signing bonus to lower that current year's cap hit through proration and those kind of tools. So it's one of the main tools that you can use when you have a contract like Goddard's. But you can also do extensions that do something very similar. It just extends the length of the contract. It's essentially a restructure plus some. And that's where that kind of comes from.
Is it fair to say the way the Eagles are signing most of their contracts, the base salary is about as low as it could possibly be? And in that scenario, you can't really move the money around. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. And it's one of the most interesting things that the Eagles do. Their base salaries are almost all $1 million for a lot of their contracts. And you see a lot of what they do is they put it in bonuses. And players love this, by the way. Players love this because when you have a signing bonus, you get that money immediately, right? So they love getting that money up front. They don't care how the team, builds their roster or how they do the accounting. They just want the money. And so that feels really good for the player, and it's very beneficial for the team if done correctly.
Right. They always say a bird in hand is better than two in the bush, right?
There you go. Absolutely.
And so one other phrase I wanted to touch on there, and we briefly talked about it earlier, was void years. I think it's kind of become a buzz phrase in the Eagles fan base at this point because Howie's always adding void years. What does this do? What is the benefit of a void year?
Void years essentially give the team an option to restructure or extend. That's really what it does, right? At the end of the day, you're able to split that. You're able to prorate whatever bonus, whether it's a signing bonus or an option bonus for just being on the roster later. You're able to spread it out. But like I said, when the contract actually does void, whether that be trade, cut, or the natural end of the contract, all that is accelerated and due. So what it does is it gives the Eagles an option to say, look, we need to restructure or extend, or you spread it out long enough where the cap rises and the hit doesn't matter as much. It's really just a team-friendly mechanism for making decisions. It buys them time to make decisions. That's what it does.
Let's talk about veterans. We mentioned earlier, depending on how many years you are in the league, you may be entitled to a different minimum salary. Is that right?
That is right. And here's what the salary would be according to Spotrac. This is what they have as for the 2025 minimum salaries.
And so that 10-year veteran, say you sign him, is that going to count against your top 51?
Probably not. Especially with what we talked about with the minimum salary veteran. benefit.
So when it comes to these contracts, there's so many different ways that they can basically give money to the player under different umbrellas, whether it's like different bonuses or base salary. Do you want to kind of walk us through how all that works?
Yeah. So what a player salary is that base salary plus any bonuses plus any incentives. And we see, as fans and as part of media or whatever, you see a lot of the base salary. You see a lot of that. And you occasionally see the bonuses. You don't always see how they're broken down. You don't always see incentives, or not always reported. What's interesting is the NFL is private, so they retain all their contracts. What you see is reports of the contracts. So there's not a lot of visibility or transparency, quite frankly, from the league to what we see as fans and as, content creators and stuff like that. So what we're seeing is reports. That's it.
So when we hear Kyler Murray must watch a certain number of hours of game film per week, is that where those little nuances that we generally don't hear about come in?
I mean, if that is an actual part of his contract, there's no way to confirm it besides actually looking at the contract. And they have addendums and things that they put in the contracts that have terms, and we just never have any visibility to. So that comes from somebody that leaked that, or if it's real, or somebody just made it up. Absolutely. I will say with base salary, just one quick point. Another thing that a lot of people harp on and yet very attached to is this average per year or annual average value with, APY or AAV. That is not a great representation of an NFL contract. It's great for understanding a contract at its base, but it really doesn't give you the full picture. Because of the way that even just base salary can be structured, you see it vary every year. So like sometimes it'll be the same, but a lot of times the teams will either front end or back end the actual base salary. You see it a lot in quarterback contracts in particular, which will be very interesting when we talk about Hurts's contract. Sorry for the spoiler. But what's interesting is that this average per year doesn't really account for that. So I just wanted to make that quick point.
Gotcha. So you talked about backloading a contract. You could see a base salary of just a few million in year one, and it could go up to 40, 50 something million at the end of that contract. Is that right?
That's right. That's actually how Deshaun Watson base salary was structured. I think that it's either 2025 or 2026. It's like some really high amount, but it was really low base salary until the last year. So.
Gotcha. And then we talked about restructuring. You really need that big base salary to clear a lot of cap space. So is that kind of a mechanism teams leave so they have some optionality as those base salaries increase?
Yeah, certainly. It's definitely a strategy that is employed by a lot of the teams for sure.
So why are there so many types of bonuses? What's the deal with this?
Yeah, teams get creative. They try to think of ways to compensate the players, but they want them to be conditional, right? So that this is a way to keep it, somewhat conditional, right? So the signing bonus is the most common kind of bonus you see. You pay it immediately upon signing. That's when the player gets the cash up front. Players love signing bonuses. They're great for players. You get the cash up front. Teams love signing bonuses. You can prorate them 5 years. That's great. You feel great about it. That's why you see them a lot. Some of the other ones you see a little bit less, right? So the roster bonus, they need to be on the roster at a specific date. Counts fully in the year that is earned. An option bonus is, here's the thing. They actually did have player options that were regularly utilized at some point in the league. They have gone away. They don't really happen anymore. And the reason they don't happen anymore is because players rather have guaranteed money if they're negotiating rather than an option to stay with the team. Teams like option bonuses because if you're on the roster, like if you're there and the team takes that option bonus, you can prorate it. It's basically a secondary signing bonus or a tertiary signing bonus. You can basically use that, and if we want you here, we'll give you some more cash right up front, but we'll prorate it. It's great.
So when it comes to option bonuses, is it fair to say the Eagles use that more than other teams? And if so, why and how are they able to do that?
Certainly. They absolutely love option bonuses because it operates as, like I said, a secondary or tertiary or however many layers of signing bonus, right? So it gives the team the option, especially if it's not guaranteed. That makes it a little bit nicer because they're able to move away if they are able to with the considering dead cap, obviously. But if they're able to, they're prorate it. They can continue to prorate and build, and it gives them more time to either restructure, extend, or take the cap hit at the end. So it's a great mechanism that the Eagles love to use.
So we hear all these great things about signing bonuses and option bonuses. Why don't teams just sign exclusively signing bonuses? The entire contract is in bonus. Why wouldn't they do that? Don't the owners have the money?
Not all owners like to spend the money like Lurie does. Lurie is willing to put cash up front and cash quickly, like in small periods, not necessarily quickly, but like in small time frames. And a lot of owners don't want to do that, right? They're a little bit more apprehensive of putting that cash up front. So, I mean, you see that a lot.
So when you have a guaranteed money, but it's not going to come out of your wallet until the future, what happens to that money in the meantime? Is there any way that it's protected? So if the owner goes bankrupt, the player is just not out of luck.
So yeah, they have to put the money in some of the money in escrow to protect it from that exact situation.
So I see here you mentioned incentives. What kind of incentives are there? We know, if the team wins the Super Bowl, the guys might get some extra cash. Is there any other types?
Yeah, so I would really love to explain this with an example. I think that's the best way to do this. So I think Saquon Barkley is a great example to use. And I know we got Quinyon Mitchell here, but I'm pivoting to Saquon Barkley on this particular example. So basically, let's say this is a fictitious contract just for the sake of explanation. Saquon Barkley signs a contract with the Eagles, and they say, if you rush for 2,000 yards, we'll give you $500,000, right? So it's based on performance or playtime benchmarks, essentially. But in this example, we're going to say performance. Since Saquon, prior to last year, did not rush for 2,000 yards, and he did not in the preceding season, it would be considered what is not likely to be earned, which means that it would not count against the cap. But since he hit that 2,000-yard threshold, it would count the following year. However, if that same fictitious contract that we just came up with would be offered the next year, since he had rushed for 2,000 yards in the previous year, it would count on the cap this year.
Gotcha. So if it's something that you're likely to do again, that you've already accomplished, it's going to hit your cap that year. But if it's unlikely that you'll hit it because of previous performances, then it doesn't count till the next year. If you do hit it.
Yes. That is a great way to explain it.
Gotcha. So is there any kind of cheat trick that you can use with the incentives to try to do some salary cap wizardry?
With incentives particularly, that I suppose if you think that there is something that they could hit that they had not hit previously, and you feel like because of the way your roster is, you could make it so it would count in the future cap.
Yeah, definitely. And you could even make that a pretty good chunk of change, knowing that it's not going to hit until the subsequent year.
Absolutely. And also players have belief in themselves and they think they can hit certain thresholds. You can try to reward. It's mutually beneficial should they hit it. And so that's a big reason incentives are utilized.
Gotcha. And so I know a buzz phrase when it comes to the salary cap is guaranteed money. What percentage of the contract is guaranteed? Deshaun Watson's getting this much guaranteed. Help me understand what this is.
Yeah. So when you hear guaranteed, everyone's conflating what guaranteed means. When they say guaranteed, they mean fully guaranteed, typically when they talk about it. And what fully guaranteed is, it composes of three different subtypes of guarantees. There is injury guarantee. So if a player gets hurt, you can't just you can't cut them and they'll lose that money. There's skill. If they perform poorly, you can't just, cut them and not able to pay them. Or cap if they need to make room to restructure. So when you hear fully guaranteed, they're guaranteed against injury, skill, and cap. Sometimes the NFL will partially guarantee contracts. Teams will partially guarantee contracts. And sometimes you'll just see injury and skill and not cap, or injury and cap and not skill. Some combination. I think the most common one is injury. And I think that cap is probably the least common that you'd see of the three.
So when you hear that someone's guaranteed money is different from their fully guaranteed money, it's one of those three umbrellas?
Correct. And to be honest, we don't usually have visibility to which the guarantee is if it's only partially guaranteed because of what I talked about previously.
Gotcha. So another thing that comes up is the franchise tag. And we know that if you draft someone in the first round, you add on the 5th-year option, you add on a couple franchise tags, you have like 7 years of control. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting concept. I think that Kirk Cousins especially has suffered from it a little bit. Players don't necessarily love franchise tag because it gives the team a lot of control over their players. That is a huge part of it. And it is a mechanism that teams do use in order to retain players that they cannot necessarily agree on their value immediately. But there is a limit to using it. So
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
Out here, there's no one way of doing things. No unwritten rules, and no shortage of adventure. Because out here, the only requirement is having fun. Bank of America invites kids 6 to 18 to golf with us. For a limited time, sign them up for a free 1-year membership, giving them access to discounted tee times at thousands of courses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/golf with us. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Restrictions apply. See BofA.com/golf with us for complete details. Copyright 2025 Bank of America Corporation.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Hey, it's Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and Michelob Ultra is getting you closer to the game than ever with courtside seats and more. Enter now at MichelobUltra.com/courtside. Michelob Ultra Superior Access Courtside 2024 to 2025 sweepstakes. No purchase necessary. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Ends on July 1st, 2025. Multiple entry periods. Visit MichelobUltra.com/superior access/courtside for free entry deadlines and official rules. Message and data rates may apply. Void where prohibited.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Are there different types?
Yeah, so I think that there's really 3 we should talk about, and that's the exclusive franchise tag, the non-exclusive franchise tag, and the transition tag. Most importantly, and the most common one you see is the exclusive franchise tag. And that's just they sign basically at the threshold that is on the screen, where it's the average of the top 5 salaries at the position or 120% of the prior salary, whichever is greater.
Gotcha. So there are players that are tight ends who pretty much are quasi receivers. And what are they designated as under the franchise tag? And is that fair?
Well, that was a huge problem with Jimmy Graham a couple years ago. I remember, and it's a big problem with it is that what you're saying is player positions that don't necessarily get as much value are obviously lower. They have a lower average, and therefore, players at lesser paid positions would receive less on the franchise tag, even if they are contributing in ways that, a receiver would, that is a higher paid position. But I think that problem extends past the tag, right? It's what value are you bringing? And football is not necessarily moving to positionless, but value is very hard to determine based solely on position. That is the framework that the CBA uses. It's the framework everybody uses, but it's a very interesting debate. And I think that I love that you brought it up.
So could Zach Bond be franchise tagged? What position group is he under?
Linebacker.
And is there other positions we think of that are also grouped as linebacker?
Yes, the edge position is the worst one because there's the distinction between linebacker and defensive end is just not resolved in the current iteration of the CBA. So it is problematic.
When they rewrite it, do you think that's something they may address?
I think it's something they have to address. I don't think they have a choice. I think that's going to be one of the things they have to talk about because it would significantly hurt, linebackers. Actually, linebackers are probably benefited to some extent because it's over inclusive.
But they'll never get it, right?
Correct.
So you said it's not used as often, but this transition tag, that sounds pretty interesting. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, so it's very similar. It's just you take the top 10 salaries of the position. It gives a right to match any other offers, but no compensation if it's declined, unlike the non-exclusive franchise tag, which we saw with Lamar Jackson a couple of years ago.
But if another team does want to sign your guy, what is that compensation?
For the non-exclusive?
Yes.
So yeah, if they want to do that, you get 2 first-round picks.
I forget who it was, but I want to say the Chiefs did that with Trey Smith. I could be completely wrong, but I remember recently there was a team that did the transition tag on one of their all-pro offensive linemen, but no one wanted to pay up 2 first-rounders. All right. So we talked about all these different ways of paying players. What is the state of cap space across the league? Are the Eagles strapped for money?
No, they're in the top 18 of teams in terms of cap space right now. The Giants are in the worst spot, and the Patriots are in the best spot.
Gotcha. And is there any team who is into the negatives? What's effective cap space mean?
Yeah, so effective cap space on over the cap where we got it was the top 51 plus the rookie draft class.
Gotcha. So it looks like the Giants, they're teetering up against the line here. Like, could they actually get penalized if they're not careful?
If they are not in compliance, and again, to be very clear, this is a screenshot of when we took it, which was earlier this week. So it's going to change. It might have already changed since we captured it, but they do have time to get into compliance.
Gotcha. So could we look kind of at what the Eagles cap situation is in more detail?
Absolutely. Here you go.
Awesome. So right away, I see this giant red number in 2028, and it looks like it's impossible that the Eagles could create that much cap space. What am I looking at?
Yeah, so it's just basically, first off, they don't necessarily have a projection of 2028 yet, so it's an estimation of it. But again, the salary cap's going to increase. There's going to be moves that are going to be made that would make that cap space, no fear of it now. If that cap space is still red 2 years from now, maybe you can have a little fear, but there's still time.
So we have these big extensions coming up. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, amongst others. Looking at this, does it look like they have enough space to retain these guys?
I think from this, it looks a little bit tight for sure because of that red number, but also it doesn't look like there's a salary cap number in there. So I think that's an issue with over the cap. I'll be clear on that. But I do think they would be able to. I think that I'm confident that Howie is going to be able to extend the people he wants to extend. But that also means that there might be some players that they will have to move on from. They'll get their core guys, though.
And we saw that pulling the Band-Aid off this offseason, not bringing back Sweat, Milton Williams, even Isaiah Rodgers to some degree. So do you think that was in preparation for some of these extensions coming up?
Yeah, I even think the CJ Gardner-Johnson move was in preparation for this too.
Gotcha. So we talked about it earlier that we wanted to look at some examples of contracts. Now, when you're looking at this, these are not the exact numbers that are in Jalen Hurts' actual contract, but they're very close. So don't get too hung up on the fine details, but the overall structure is there. So could you just help us walk through what we're looking at?
Sure. Before I do, I just want to contextualize this real quick. So basically, this is an example of an extension, right? So Jalen Hurts was on his rookie contract, and 1 year of his rookie contract is included in this. You see that the actual agreement's 6 years, but the contract is 5 years, right? So it's $255 million over 5 years plus that 1 year from his rookie contract that's included. That was restructured. This also from Spotrac, his incentives were $500,000 if he won the Super Bowl. So it's possible that these of additional base salary. So it's possible that these numbers would even be plus 500,000. I'm not sure when this was updated. But I also want to say that if you look at the total value, he's 7th amongst quarterbacks. If you look at the average per year, he's 9th among quarterbacks. You look at the guaranteed, it's partially guaranteed at $179 million, and that's 8th. But he's fully guaranteed. And that, by the way, that partial guarantee, it is specified for injury. It doesn't say what if it's for cap or skill otherwise, but it is at least injury for sure. And then he's fully guaranteed at $110 million. So we have to figure out where that other $69 million, it's unsure what it actually is guaranteed on. And that's 9th. He's 9th in fully guarantees at 43% of his contract.
So that $110 million, no matter what, as long as the earth is here, he will get that money. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, yes.
Gotcha. So in the grand scheme of things, before we get into the individual columns here, is this a good contract?
I think it is a brilliant contract. I think it serves Hurts' interest in when he got paid, when he received the cash. And I think it's very cap friendly, and it gives the Eagles a lot of optionality later in the contract.
Gotcha. So we touched on option bonuses earlier, which is essentially a signing bonus that just happens down the line. Is that what we're seeing with all these option bonuses that are kind of like a staircase here?
That's exactly what you're seeing. Because if you look at the third column from the left side, which is salary, it's his base salary, it's all at like $1 million. So how do you compensate him? Well, if you want to do it for a team-friendly way and a way that a player loves, because he is getting an influx of cash at, if you look at the bottom column of the first table, you can see that that's what he's getting in cash every year. So he's getting that influx right away of cash plus whatever the actual salary is, but he doesn't have to wait. He's just getting a bunch of it effectively becomes his base salary, but it doesn't necessarily work that way.
So when that option bonus arrives, let's say last year's option bonus, 2024, that top number, we see $7.75 million. That's what's against the Eagles cap in Correct. 2024. But you go to the bottom of the column. Is that essentially that all that money's going to Hurts as soon as that is exercised?
That is exactly correct.
So he gets that $38 million as essentially as a signing bonus as soon as that is exercised.
Yep.
So that's pretty sweet. Each year, a new option bonus activates, and it just stacks on top of the previous one. Is that right?
That's right. And that's what's brilliant about this contract. But it's also brilliant from Hurts' perspective because the team also is incentivized to keep him because they're prorating every year. So they would be taking dead cap should they cut him. And again, the option bonus isn't guaranteed, but he does have guaranteed money in that option bonus. So the team is kind of still sunk in with him. There's a reason for them to keep him, and he's getting the influx of cash every year. So it still works out for him very well.
So option bonuses sound amazing. You just stretch out the money even more thinly than you did with the original signing bonus over more and more years. But I look over to the right and I see these dead cap numbers in the hundreds of millions. Should I be worried about that? Is that something that could come back to bite the Eagles?
I mean, if Hurts does not continue to play at his level, it could hurt them for sure. I mean, that's the risk of this contract. That the Eagles very much believe in Jalen Hurts, and honestly, they have no reason not to, based on his play. So they don't want to take a dead cap hit of the $100 million, right? But they're tied in a way that they can build a really strong roster around Hurts because of the way they're able to manipulate the cap.
And people will remember, I think Denver ate $85 million in dead money when they got rid of Russell Wilson. That's essentially what is reflected in that red column on the right here.
Absolutely.
So is there recent examples of that players on the team who had option bonuses where they weren't necessarily performing up to the level? And
I am glad you brought that up because there is, and that would be everyone's favorite talking point of players that they don't want on the team anymore, and that's Bryce Huff.
Bryce Huff. So that makes it's harder to get rid of him.
It's very difficult. When a player has a contract structured like this, it is very difficult to get out of. And the Hurts contract structure is very similar to Huff at a much lighter scale. It's a little more palatable should they have to cut him, but it's still more difficult than the traditional structure.
So we also see this option bonus structure with Bryce Huff, and we know that he's due, if you can see 2025, nearly $17 million. Is that guaranteed? How about the following year?
So here's the thing. He has about 2/3 of the contract guaranteed, fully guaranteed. There's no differentiation. 2/3 of the contract is fully guaranteed at $34 million. So basically, again, to contextualize it, it's a $51.1 million agreement total value over 3 years, 17.033 APY. He's, in terms of edges, he's 14th in total value, 17th in APY, 17th in guarantees. So it's a 3-year contract with void years. And again, that $16 million you see at the bottom of signing, he was paid as cash up front. Should the team use the option bonus, he would receive that 15.58 this year in addition to his base salary. What becomes difficult is there's still the guaranteed money and the prorated signing bonus that are still, it makes him difficult to get rid of.
Gotcha. And I see that 26 option bonus, it's not guaranteed. So after this season, the Eagles can get out of that contract scot-free. Is that right?
That is not right, because there's still the prorated bonuses and there's still the guaranteed money. He's still guaranteed some money. So even if they wanted to cut and run, it's very difficult for them to cut and run here.
So based off your read of what the Eagles think of Huff and what money he has due, what do you think are the most likely scenarios? Or at this point, are they going to bite the bullet like they did with James Bradbury?
So in my mind, the optimal scenario is to trade him before that 2025 option bonus would be triggered. That would be the best and cleanest scenario. I don't think Bryce Huff is a bad football player. I think he could thrive somewhere else. The Eagles would not get great compensation because the contract is not great. And plus, Huff didn't necessarily play great. That would be the optimal solution, is to trade him prior, because then the only thing that they would be responsible for is the dead cap of the signing bonus. That's all that they would have to eat. Which is still a pretty decent amount of money, but that would be the optimal scenario. However,
Gotcha.
Yeah, the other scenario, I mean, there's a bunch of scenarios, but I think you post June 1 cut and just bite the bullet at that point.
So would the Eagles need enough cap space to eat that dead money?
Yes, because it would accelerate and all be doable.
Does bringing Dallas Goedert back potentially hurt that prospect?
It certainly hurts that prospect.
Gotcha. So we may have a scenario where Huff doesn't play much, but he's still getting $17 million. Is that right?
It is a realistic outcome, and it would be an unfortunate outcome for, I think, Huff and for the Eagles.
So they could save future cap by getting rid of him. And you mentioned how he really doesn't have much value because another team would have to absorb all that salary. Could there be a scenario where they have to like attach a 4th round pick just to get a team to take him off their hands?
Yep. It's a very real outcome that could happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would be a 4th, but it's possible. Who knows?
I think we're both in agreement that Howie is a master with how he manages the cap, but we have to be realistic. His biggest signing last year is looking like a potential bust. Is that a fair characterization?
That is a more than fair characterization. I mean, listen, it was a little bit of a dart throw because we didn't know what Huff looked like at high volume because the way he was used. Plus, he wasn't a great scheme fit. I mean, he was not put in a position to succeed. And with the contract, he had very high expectations. So it's a miss. It happens.
Yeah, I wanted Jonathan Greenard. Because he was the other big edge who was on the market. And I do believe he got a little bit more money, but I thought he basically had better tape against better opponents. But that's for another day. Do you think it's such a sunk cost that it's going to preclude the Eagles from winning? Yes?
I thought you said you were saying that.
Do you think?
Oh, I do not think that.
Okay.
No, I was like trying to think about what I was going to say to you because I was like, really, I don't think you think that. I don't think you actually think that. No, I don't think it's that big of a sunk cost. I do think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's an unnecessary hurdle, and I think it was a problem that was manufactured by the Eagles unnecessarily. So.
Gotcha. So just from a a 10,000 foot view. What makes the Eagles good at managing all this? Are they getting a competitive advantage over other teams, but how they navigate the salary cap?
They are getting a competitive advantage. I think it's twofold, right? So I think it's Howie's, use of void years, restructure, and extensions. And I think it's Lurie's willingness to put cash up front. I think the combination of those two is not necessarily unprecedented at the NFL, but at the level that they're able to institute it successfully is unprecedented, and it creates a competitive advantage that I think helped the Eagles build the roster that we saw last year and that we'll see this year.
And are all the other teams signing as many option bonus slated contracts as the Eagles, or are they kind of unique in that sense?
They are a lot more unique in the fact that they have almost zero base salary and use these option bonus. Other teams do use them, but these base salaries will either start really high and get low, or start really low and or the opposite, essentially.
Gotcha. Do you think that over time, by having successful contracts that have option bonuses, they've gained some street cred with agents and players to sign structures like this?
Well, yeah, I think that players love getting money up front. And I think that there's a lot of validity in that approach in terms of, agents only get paid when players get paid. So that's something that not everyone knows, but an agent only gets a % of when the player is paid. So agents also love receiving the money up front. They don't really care how it's structured. Teams care a lot how it's structured because that matters to them. But they want their money. They want the cash. And that's how you get the cash.
Yeah. And when you're looking, imagine that there's a curve of the cap hits over time for a given player, right? When the Eagles have all these option bonuses, you'll see right here how it extends out the payment schedule into years in the future when the player's no longer on the team. So they're embracing dead money. Well, what that does to this curve is it really flattens it and it blunts that peak. So you're never paying this super high cap hit in any given year. Is that right?
That's a brilliant way to describe it. Absolutely.
So other teams, they may be trying to offset the peaks of their big contracts by 1 or 2 years so that it doesn't all come due 1 year and then they run out of space. Meanwhile, the Eagles, they can have all of these stack on top of each other, but because they're spread out so thinly, it never stacks that crazy high.
Right.
So, when it comes, there are disadvantages. We look at James Bradbury. He was a coach essentially last year who counted pretty significantly against the cap. So it's not like it's a cheat code that always pays dividends, but if you evaluate a player correctly, it does provide a benefit. Would you agree with that?
I think that is a great way to describe it. 100% agreed.
Awesome. So I think that, this was a really good salary cap 101 through the lens of the Eagles. If there's something we didn't touch on, a certain player's contract, a certain mechanism, or we explained it in a way that was unclear, I would invite everyone to write in comments. One of the reasons people like this show is because I'm very engaging. So definitely throw them in there. And we're happy to, keep educating on cap throughout the season. But I was really happy to do this episode with you. I think it, provided a nice second voice, so I didn't just lecture to people for an hour. So I appreciate it.
Hey, I appreciate it too. It's an honor to work with you.
Awesome. Well, stay tuned for episode 5 of The Edge. This was Eagles Eric and Sam Finkel. Till next time.